Welcome to Steaming It Up Anywhere. I'm Kristin Brynteson, the director of NIU STEAM's Professional Development Program, and I'm excited to be talking today with Martha Riley from Byron Middle School. And Martha's going to talk a little bit about some of the math activities she's doing in and out of the classroom. So welcome, Martha. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for asking me to be here. I'm excited to share the activity I have today. My activity is based on probability, which is what we would be teaching if I were in the classroom right now. So it's the end of a lesson that would compare theoretical probability and experimental probability. So leading up to the activity, I just want to tell you a little bit about what I would be telling my kids, so that if you choose to do an activity like this, you can still do this without the lesson, but I want you to know the parts that kind of go into it. So we would do a lot of, we'd of course talk about the algorithm for figuring out theoretical probability, and then I would actually put them into groups to do the experimental probability. The experimental probability of a small group and then putting it into bigger groups to see that eventually experimental probability and theoretical probability come together. So that's where the lesson is headed. But the activity that I've got is based on a six-sided die. So you could use a six-sided die, you could use a spinner, you could put six numbers in a hat. You don't really have to have any supplies. You don't have to have a dice, I guess. But the number six is important because there's six things to put together in this activity. So it's based on a marble run, where you start a marble and it by gravity or by ramps and circles, it goes from one end of a path to the other end of the path. When I designed it, I really was thinking about a Rube Goldberg machine where you could put anything you wanted to in it. Now, at this point in my classroom, we would use marbles, but I would encourage my kids to use anything that will roll. And actually in the directions I have a pea, a round stone, a basketball, whatever they'd like. And then they can use whatever they like to make the path as well. So each number of the die is assigned a specific task. So here is my task. So whether they roll a 1 through a 6, they have to build whichever one they roll. So the lesson itself is, to talk about, do they think they're going to be able to complete it? Do they think they're going to roll all 6 things? What's the probability that that's going to happen? So you can do some discussion on that and leave it very open-ended, because of course it's going to end up kind of interesting. All I've done is took these 6 things and then a record sheet. I'm going to ask them to make at least 9 sections long, because then of course it's basically this and a half. So they have to think about probability more than just 1 out of 6. But I actually asked one of my students and one of my nephews to do this one over the weekend so I could see how it worked out. And it was a challenge, but it really made them think outside of the box, because they can get 2 up ramps in a row. How are they going to solve that? What are they going to do to defy gravity to get that to go up? So it really turned into a much more problem solving, but it turned also into a family activity, which is the part I like about it with distance learning, is that little brothers and sisters, older brothers and sisters, parents, whoever is in their family, have really enjoyed this, and they've gotten out some of those things that they didn't have before. One of my groups did it outside. One of them started with Legos, and then they got their old Matchbox cars. So I'm excited in that realm with that idea, kind of to share it with the distance learning, because it's really turned into something that the whole family can do. And even though it's not technically the math lesson, or it could be new material, the math that's involved is so embedded in it, that really just making the mind open up and think outside the box is really what I want my kids to be doing on this distance learning, on these distance learning tasks.
When probability is a tough one for students to get. I know even when we in the office try to write probability activities, we struggle.
Yes, it is a hard one. And I did in the lesson that I wrote, I kind of went through it, so, and I can make that available if anybody would be interested. Just a family friendly kind of version of, think about what would happen if you did this, or while you're sitting here, roll the dice and see what you get. You know, in the actual directions, I would have them make a data table of all the possible outcomes, and then to make, you know, compare it to actually what their data table comes out as. Because I think that's where the experimental and the theoretical go to work. So one of the examples that I used when I was making this up, because I was working on it since we've been home, was that Sally, let's say Sally, Sally got bored with the snacks in the house. She either had cake or pie, but she just couldn't decide which one to have. So she flipped a coin. And so every day for a week, she flipped a coin to see if, to see what snacks she would have. And at the end of the week, she had 5 pieces of cake and 2 pieces of pie. And then taking that information and comparing it to, is that what you would expect her to get in a week? You know, shouldn't it be 50-50? Because kids get that. They get the flipping of the coin. I'm so sorry. They
You're
get
fine.
the flipping of the coin. They get, you know, they get that all, you know, they know their grades. You know, when they wish for something on a test, they don't understand that's probability. You know, even charting the weather, you know, with the probability of, they say it's going to be 90% chance of rain, but it doesn't really rain. You know, why is that? So I figure anything to get that kind of probability in front of them, and even just having those kinds of conversations with kids. You know, if you're in a place where you can have a Zoom meeting, just to have the discussion, not really even to have the you know, the lesson, I guess. So you know, just what do you think is going to happen when this, and why do you think that's going to happen? You know, because kids get that there's, yeah, like I said, they get that there's a 50-50 chance of heads and tails. They do that all the time. You know, so, or, you know, rock paper scissors, you get a 1/3 chance every time.
So how did your sample students like the activity? Did they enjoy it? How engaging
They
was
did.
it?
They did. My nephew is actually in northern Wisconsin. So he is not my student. His mother was like, well, I'll give it to him, but I don't know if he's going to do this. And she said he's so proud of himself. He's so excited. And she said what he did, and she'd never seen this happen, which is something that we as teachers get to see happen, that he talked to himself, and that he would say, no, wait, I'm going to do it this way. And she was like, that was really weird. And I'm like, yeah, but that's how kids think. And, you know, and for him to be able to have that self-talk that he even has to solve that problem, I thought was fantastic. My kid who is my student, who did it here with his mom and his younger brother, they ended up with 4 down ramps in a row.
Oh, wow.
And that was difficult. And I said, so what are you gonna do? And his mom said, she's like, we just got 4 down ramps. I said, wow, how's he gonna solve that problem? And she goes, aren't you gonna tell me? I'm like, no, I'm not going to tell you. Anyway, they put it in a tree so that they could get the down ramps in a row. And because both of them thought, well, it has to be flat. And nobody would, and they both ended up getting some dimension in it. So it was interesting. And it was really great to get the feedback from both those moms that their kids were really excited about it. So.
Well, that's fun. So yeah, it's a great activity. You're getting, you said, the problem solving, the reflecting, you've got the iterative design process in there where they're trying, and if something doesn't work, they've got to try again and improve.
And so important to get that design process in there. And so important that they all come out with something different. Because that's the part that I have to figure out, how will I share this now? And I think I'm going to be able to do it through a Zoom, because I'm going to try it at some level. And I think that sharing their videos either in Google Classroom or via Zoom, so that they can also see what other people thought. I think that's the biggest part that's going to be the hardest, because they all think they have the only way, and then they see somebody else, and then a revision process of, oh my gosh, this person did that. I want to try mine and do the revision and give you another one.
Yeah, I think having the students record their outcomes and share those videos kind of in whatever format, and reflect on each other's, especially if they had similar features, like this one had 2 down ramps, and here's how I did 2 down ramps. Well, here's how you did 2 down ramps. What were the chances of both of us getting 2 down ramps in that order? So there's a lot of great conversations around a math. And I think that's what's so important, is that students can see math as not just something that you have a formula that you fill in, but it's a conversation starter. I know
absolutely
you and I have talked a lot about the notice and wonder, and you could really pull some notice and wonder out of that.
And my kids are used to that at this time of year, so it won't be out of their scope. But if I had to start from scratch, I think this would be a great activity to start from scratch with that too. If you haven't had an interactive classroom where your kids have that communication piece, I think this would be an easy one to have them have the fun and then say, how did that work for you? And you could even pull in, kind of backload the math in it that way.
Yeah. I think there's some opportunity for connections to other content areas as well. You've got the science of energy transfer. You could do a narrative, tell the story of the journey and actually do some creative writing with it.
Sorry, that was a terrible look. I think that's a great idea. My writing teacher is really struggling. So that is a fabulous idea. The science teacher and I have been going back and forth on it. The special ed teacher and I had a long conversation that at this point of the lesson, it's pretty inclusive. The differentiation might be to pare down how many pieces they had. But every time I think I'm going to do that with my inclusion classes, they explode. So I don't want to go into it with any limiting things.
Well, that's great. Well, any kind of tips for teachers who might want to be trying this with their students, or any other kind of last thoughts?
My tip is to be very, very flexible, and to be encouraging of the child who makes it roll this far, and encouraging of the child who's up on his roof making it roll on with a basketball. This is very, very open-ended, and sometimes it's hard to let go of what you thought you should get, but try it. It might be the best thing you did.
Great. Well, I'm excited to hear how it goes with your students. Good luck as you roll it out to them. No pun intended.
We call it the lock and roll.
Great. Well, Martha, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate the activity ideas, and you stay safe and healthy.
Thank you. You too.